Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to the ninth episode of the Matrix of Mendacity Masterclass podcast. Today is January 20th, 2026. That's an interesting date. Keep that in the back of your mind. Today is going to be an interesting episode because while I am welcomed by my co host Juxtaposition, we also have a special guest here today who is got a fascinating history. Jennifer Small, who was a former UPI reporter who had an interesting series of events leading up to the uh, revolution in Iran all those years back. I believe it was 1979, if I was correct. I might have got that wrong, but let me welcome them up and I'll give Jennifer a chance to introduce herself and juxtaposition as well. Howdy, everybody. Make sure to unmute your mics, and I'll let Jennifer go first. You'll have to hit it one more time, Jennifer. There.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Hi. Well, this is really a treat for me to come and share my stories from many years ago. I mean, I could have never imagined all those years ago I was witnessing something that would be interesting all these years later, but it's just as relevant now, even more so. I was just doing some freelance work in Paris in the fall, winter of 1978, and I ended up doing a few stories for UPI, and they asked me to go cover this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini. I'd never heard of him. He was having some sort of a revolutionary event taking place in a town 25 miles west of Paris, and I spent 3 days there, and one night. I mean, not all night, but into the night, because my ride were the freelance photographers, and they had to hang around in case someone famous showed up. But I have a story to tell about what I actually witnessed there, which was revolutionary and historic, but really what I now understand it to be, thanks to what I've learned from Juxtaposition and you, Josh, about all the mendacities. And it's quite, I think, relevant to today's time when Iran is so much in the news.
Indeed, that's actually really interesting because here we are in 2026, and so much of that is just almost happening again, and it's eerie almost. But
Mhm.
that's one motivation for why we wanted to do this topic, but also because it is connected to what we talked about last week: NGOs, foundations, institutes, think tanks. It's just this big hydra or octopus with all these tentacles that's all over, and almost anywhere you go, anywhere you look, it pops up. And so this is very much related to that, and is very interesting. We appreciate you being here for the show. It's really nice to have a guest here. Juxtaposition, why don't you go ahead and talk about some of the stuff that was going on around that time and how in Vietnam, as you had mentioned, and how that kind of connects to what we're living through right now today, and then how that also connects to the Iranian Revolution, the first one.
Okay. Well, everything is going on concurrently. I mean, the activities going on in the Middle East, Israel and Egypt and Iran and Iraq, they all have activities going on every day. And so too in Southeast Asia and other places in the world. And here in the United States, we live sort of in a encapsulated bubble, and we just know what the television evening news tells us, or if we used to get a newspaper, you'd read the newspaper. And that's kind of our data source. Today, you can go on YouTube and get the Poppycock, Balderdash, and Mendacity that they produce and publish. They're in the publication of Poppycock. And so Vietnam, I mean, you can go back to the 1800s with Vietnam, but you should know that America's involvement in Vietnam really was at least from the Korean War and the World War II, when the Japanese were defeated. The United States was always there, and the French were there too. But then, we brought in Michigan State University and then the Rand Corporation to create a detention model for controlling the entire region of Southeast Asia, and Vietnam specifically, which is a part of Southeast Asia, which expands far beyond Vietnam. But they created Agroville, which is Michigan State University, created this concept of where the food sources are, which would be farming, rice farming, and goat farming, and domesticated animals, and then build the village sort of around this agrarian model. That was the way it was in, I think, 46 of 47 provinces. They developed Hunger Games, which they called provinces or districts. They had a central bank authority in Hanoi. Hanoi was the industrial headquarters of Vietnam, Hanoi, and they had a central bank there. The only central bank in Vietnam was in Hanoi. And they had mining and minerals, and they had farming also. But they specifically treated Hanoi a little differently because it was a banking financial center and a manufacturing center, whereas the rest of the country was rural. And it was based on this Agroville model, which the Rand Corporation renamed it Strategic Hamlet Program.
I was going to say a lot of that program and the things that kind of run parallel to it, a lot of these were created by these think tanks based on research done by these think tanks or people associated who sit on the boards of multiple. A lot of this comes directly from these enlightened think tanks.
Right. And the prisoner dilemma game psychological element is woven into the fabric of every single operation. So how you manage your local county jail, how you manage your state prisons, how you manage your federal penitentiaries, those are all research laboratories for the think tanks, as are mental hospitals. Mental, like Bellevue State Hospital in Manhattan, New York, Bellevue, that's an experiment that they keep notes and records of how people respond to electroshock treatment, isolation, solitary confinement, different types of pharmaceutical hallucinogenic drugs, not just LSD, but there's a whole cadre of different pharmaceutical therapies. And they test them out on people who are incarcerated that can be used as lab rats. Well, so was Vietnam. They used Vietnam as a laboratory experiment for Dow Chemical, who developed napalm. Napalm? You want any napalm in your Hamlet? And then Monsanto, we know Monsanto through Agent Orange, but there's Agent Pink, there's Agent Azul, there's periwinkle blue, orange. Monsanto, there's Roundup, there's pesticides, herbicides, defoliant, that they're in the defoliant business, defoliant with carcinogens that can cause cancer. And Monsanto wasn't the only corporation. US Rubber, there's all these other companies who make napalm and Agent Pink, orange, green, blue. In other words, it's not just Monsanto. They have doppelganger evil twins that make these weapon systems to defoliate so that the satellites can see down, the spy satellites and the spy planes can see if enemy troops are moving at night. I said night because that's when the guerrillas would move, at night, because during the day everyone can see what's going on, but at night you had the cover of night. But not if you defoliate the jungle, and not if you have Monsanto and Lockheed and Raytheon Missile Guidance. Then 24/7, the military NATO forces can illuminate your hamlets day and night. Okay, so that's going back to the 1950s and 60s and 70s in Vietnam. But the operation known as Vietnam came to an end officially in 1975. And around that time, our attention moved to Iran. And we had the Shah of Iran, who had been installed by a CIA military British intelligence coup, who had created Israel. And then they created Israel in 1948. And then they created the Shah of Iran in 1953. 5 years after Israel was created, they did a coup d'etat of Mossadegh, who wanted to nationalize British Petroleum, Exxon, the Getty oil, Shell oil. They wanted to have the people of Iran share in more of the profits of giving up their natural resource of crude oil. And so it was decided, we got to get rid of this knucklehead. So out with him and bring in the nice young Shah, the handsome Shah with all of his medals. And we had that for 26 years. We had the Shah of Iran until then Jennifer Small rolls into town in Paris.
Yes.
And then it was decided around the time that Jennifer arrived in Paris that it's out with the old, in with the new, who's no different than the old. But, it's like a lipstick on a pig. Now we're going to call it an Arabian racehorse. So in comes the Ayatollah. But to bring the Ayatollah into the international stage, you've got to have the United Press International introduce him, along with Time Magazine and the notable periodicals of the day, to pimp out this new religious supreme commander, because nobody knows who he is. I mean, they've had 26 years to get to know the Shah and understand his totalitarian secret police and the redistribution of land and totalitarianism, which is all part of fascism. It's fascism, colonialism, which is what we already did in Vietnam for the past 100 years. Now we take the show over to Iran, which we've been doing for 26 years. Jennifer enters Paris, and then that's when I would pass the baton back to you, Josh, and to Jennifer.
Yes.
Take it away from there.
Yeah. So thank you for the bridging the gap from kind of pre-Vietnam through Vietnam up until Jennifer in France. So why don't you go ahead, Jennifer? Please just let us know what you saw, what you were thinking then, and what you're thinking now. The floor is all yours.
Well, first of all, I want to take full credit for the revolution. I mean, no, I just, you never know what you can do on a Saturday. I was just having fun freelancing in Paris in between serious jobs. I was just enjoying my youth, and I was a romantic, adventurous young woman and having fun. And I just got a call from my UPI Paris bureau chief to please go down to the suburb and cover this Ayatollah Khomeini, who might be having a press conference. And I said, who are you talking about? And he said, well, just grab some newspapers and read about him on the way down. I'll send a photographer to pick you up. I mean, this was way before the internet. You couldn't go online. Who is this guy? Wikipedia, X, Facebook him, none of it. It's just all very seat of the pants. And so what I thought I'd do briefly is kind of share some of the experiences that I took in whole cloth for 3 days when I was there and believed. For example, you mentioned Vietnam. The revolutionaries that I met, many of whom were students who had abandoned their PhD programs in London to join the revolution, they reminded me of Vietnam War protesters in America. And everyone I talked to hated the Shah. I mean, they hated the Shah the way I remember American students hating LBJ and Nixon. So I identified with these. I'll put it this way: I had some sympathy or empathy for where they were coming from. They wanted to have a new ideal and better government, get rid of the old tyrants and bring in the new with all their idealism. And so I believed them, and I believed that they were earnest and sincere. And but I didn't know who this guy was, and the only reason I got the assignment was because they had a reporter. One of their main staff persons was away on maternity leave, and they were short-staffed. So it's just a fluke that I was there at this momentous time. And my first impressions after being on the compound, it was a town called Neufeu-le-Château, 25 miles west of Paris, a little village. I thought this guy was kind of a religious eccentric, perhaps, with a following, kind of like a cult-like figure. When he emerged from his little house to go into this large tent, the tent was the size of a city block. The tent had a big banner on it, which said in French, "It is better to die than to accept humiliation." And out comes Khomeini, who was 79, and the clothes are just dripping off of him. He's frail, and he looks like he might have a stroke at any minute. But he's this big leader, right? And his eyes were just black. I mean, just like shooting darts, like Darth Vader black. I mean, just like hatred. It was just exuded out of his face and his eyes and so forth. And he was looking, I think they call it the middle stare when you're looking off toward the horizon. I mean, he was like this fixation. And I immediately thought of Ahab in the book Moby Dick and the character Gregory Peck played. That obsessive, I'm going to get this whale or I'm going to get the Shah. I mean, this was like an obsessive guy, but it seemed kind of kooky to me. He gave his press conferences and led prayers inside this tent. Women were not allowed, so UPI really should have sent a man because I couldn't get in. The men who did go in they all had to take off their shoes outside and then go into the tent. So there's a little house where Khomeini lived, and then there was the tent, and then there was another little house where everybody gathered and had lunch, and a few reporters, and there weren't many, and photographers, and the aides and the translators were there. And I sat down. They made me wear a chador, put it over my head, and I put it on like Grace Kelly style, kind of, try to be a little stylish. And the guy came up to me and pulls it down. He says, "This is Islam, pull it down." I said, "Okay." And but I sat down on the floor and had watery vegetable soup with the group, and terrible soup and bread, and just talked to them and got some information. And I just came back thinking, well, so I got together all my information and went back. But that first day, the Ayatollah said that he had sent out a message via his audio cassettes, which were then sent via the telephone lines back to Iran. He said, "I'm calling on all the young soldiers to desert the army and join the revolution." And the next day, the soldiers were going into the cafes in Tehran and shooting and killing their officers who were just sitting down for an espresso, and bam, they're gone. They're dead. So I thought, whoa, this guy's important, so I better pay attention to what he has to say. And then I was there for 2 more days, and just gathering more information, talking to students, observing events. It was quite theatrical and quite even biblical at times. I was there one night because my ride with the photographers wasn't going to leave until night, and Khomeini came out at night, and it was pitch black. There weren't street lights or anything around. It was a small little village, and just as soon as he enters his tent for prayers, there was this huge thunder and pouring rain. I mean, that's why it felt like a Hollywood production, and I was standing under a little, something to keep out of the rain, an overhang, and just listening to these chants coming from inside this tent, which was all aglow, and I just felt like
Otherworldly.
Exactly. Like I was either in a time machine and I'd gone back to some time in the Old Testament, or this was a Hollywood production. It was one or the other.
That term is I won't say like it's an absolute, but it's very similar to how trance works. Like the Hollywood stare here and you'll be hypnotized. That's one thing, but trance is that like I'm in this experience. I'm transference. You're transferred into the experience, and so very interesting.
And so, but when it was time for Khomeini to leave, all of a sudden the rain just stopped, the thunder stopped, everything, and he just went back to his house. But as I stood there under the little lean-to to not get wet, some young Iranian came up to me, and he was all excited and happy and kind of just all aglow, and he said, "Well, what do the Americans think about this?" And I thought, well, what am I going to say? And I said something really stupid. I said, well, I guess Americans are afraid that the communists will take over if the Shah goes. And the guy just, he just said, Americans have no idea what's going on. And he was right. The Americans didn't have any idea what was going on. And so that was my experience. And that was my boots on the ground 26-year-old version of it. But I should say a couple things. The aides there were talking quite a bit about how they're going to create this ideal society in Iran, and they're going to ensure women's rights were going to be upheld, and how Khomeini respected women, and they would get an education and everything they wanted. And even Khomeini praised women for helping bring about the revolution and so forth. But basically, there was one of the mendacities is that they were very aware that they were trying to appeal to a Western audience. And so they were saying things that sounded pro-democratic to appeal to Europeans and Americans to make this guy more palatable so he could be more readily accepted by the West, whether they liked it or not. And one thing that sort of affected me, but personally, there was a really nice man there named, I've got the notes here, I have to find it, but he was one of the top aides, and he wore Western dress and a nice friendly face, and he was a top aide to Khomeini, and he later went to Iran with Khomeini when he was installed in February. I was there in November, December of 78, so in 79 he went back, and in 1982 this man who'd been a top aide was executed by firing squad at a prison. And that really sent a chill down my spine, because we don't really do that in America. If you have a political opponent, you don't usually kill them by firing squad. So that was a real reality check for me. So those are, and then later the story for me continued on a personal level, because then I went back to Washington, where then I moved to Washington D.C. and let's see, I'm trying to remember the timeline, but I did go to the inauguration. I covered the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, which would have been January
Today.
20th, 1981.
That's why I said keep that date in your mind at the beginning to the audience.
It's
Yeah,
the
and so I
44th
was
year
there.
anniversary of Ronald Reagan's inauguration and the release of the hostages from the State Department.
Yes, and he veered from script during his inauguration. He said, I just want everyone to know, I've just gotten word that our hostages have cleared Iranian airspace and they're en route to Germany, and they're all going to be safe and sound. And everybody cheered, and it was, oh, happy day. Ronald Reagan is here. And Jimmy Carter was sitting there looking really defeated.
I think it might have been his second term, but his second term when he was inaugurated facing the obelisk, which was significant.
You're talking about Reagan?
Reagan, I think it was his second swearing.
No, well, the second one, I believe he had to do indoors because
okay, then it was this one. This would have been the first one.
Well, that's typically where the
side of the White House.
Well, typically
the Capitol building.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're outside the Capitol, looking toward the Washington Monument, which is toward
the obelisk.
Yeah,
absolutely, yes. And so the hostages were taken later on, obviously after the Iranian Revolution took hold. Also, in 1979, Khomeini was named Time Magazine's Man of the Year, which I think was designed to legitimize him to the West. And so these different protocols were in place to make him, again, more palatable. And, I have to admit, I was kind of bamboozled, but it's amazing to me that there were not more reporters there when I was there. There was mostly just some regional French reporters and photographers. There was one woman from the Chicago Sun-Times there, a woman named Georgianne Geyer, who was a syndicated columnist. She was the only major media person there. And what was the Chicago Sun-Times doing there? I mean, that's a little strange. So there you go. Yeah, so there he is. And so when he returned to Iran, he returned to a hero's welcome. They just loved him there. And when he died, people were trying to touch his dead body as the body was carried down the street. So I had no idea that these events could be orchestrated by larger powers like bankers and maybe the CIA. I just didn't even think of it, but it's just so remarkable that I was even there in the first place. And because usually these big newspapers and bureaus, they have Middle East experts, people who have PhDs, who write books, who give lectures on the Middle East, on Iran, and it was just little old me, and I just went and had a great time, but had really enjoyed talking with people there and having that experience.
It's awesome. I appreciate you being here and sharing that, especially on January 20th.
Mm-hmm.
Just before we kind of segue into the next thing, how do you see that today versus like when you were there, like looking back at it, thinking about it before we did the show today? Like, what is your opinion on what you saw in hindsight with the 2020 hindsight?
Well, I was just completely buffaloed. I mean, I just took everything in at face value back then. And when they said, "Oh, we're going to really protect women's rights," I said, "Oh, good, right on, right, yes." But meantime, they're forcing me to wear this scarf to protect my eyebrows, even though,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a little bit of hypocrisy right there. Um, no, I think if anything, it was the execution of this man that I thought was just seemed to be like a really decent, attractive human being. And I mean, that's really barbaric. Like, why not just fire I mean, it's okay, you're dismissed. You're not part of the court now. But no, they have to execute him by firing squad. And I don't know what that's about or where that other guy was coming from. But clearly there were multi agendas going on. And um, yeah, I just, it makes, I'd like to know more on how money is funneled and channeled and organized and distributed to make these things possible.
That's
Also, one thing to keep in mind about the Shah is he had been exiled, not the Shah, the Ayatollah had been exiled from Iran for 14 years. And he had been living in Iraq, and the Shah put pressure on Iraq to get rid of him. And so Iraq sent him to France, and that just set things up for him to have this following. But I'll tell you what was real is people really hated the Shah. And I think that it's just an example of how we don't know what's really going on in other countries. And maybe the people there don't know what's going on there as well. But also, oh, I forgot my train of thought. I'll get back to it.
I was going to say, the whole thing is kind of what we're going to segue into, because that is the burning question. How does this whole thing work? And it's kind of like the Russian nesting dolls, but instead of the dolls, it's like a pyramid. There are pyramids within pyramids and within pyramids, and we're going to touch on a little bit of that today. We did the episode last week where we talked about think tanks, and then I did a presentation on tax-free foundations. Those two things are key elements because that's kind of the vehicle for all of it, to a varying degree. So,
Um, well,
go ahead.
one thing I just when you asked me like then and now, I mean, the main thing is I believed all these uprisings were organic and came from the people and were populist expressions, populist movements. And now I don't see that way at all. And I think if we can learn from this to today's uprisings that look like uprisings from Minnesota to Iran to the Philippines to Thailand to Venezuela to anywhere, they're probably all being organized and orchestrated, and maybe there's a few people actually genuinely jump in.
Yeah.
But I wish we could understand that maybe this isn't a populist uprising at all.
I agree, 100%. I think that's very likely that there are a handful of people who, it's like the analogy of water. Somebody has got to be there to supply water or currency. And, if that doesn't happen, then things just grind to a halt immediately. And so somebody has got to be putting, for all intents and purposes, blood into the system. It's what keeps it alive. So, juxtaposition, why don't you chime back in there?
Yeah, there's a lot of different slogans like money makes the world go round, right? And without water, there can be no farming.
Mm-hmm.
Without water, there can be no sewage treatment. Without water, There can be no canals and, barges and deliveries like they do in Europe. They have a barge system along the rivers and canals in the different countries in Western Europe. And so if that's sort of a graphic visual model, if you visited farmlands or you visited Western Europe, you will see bridges and canals and rivers and barges and coal and farm products being moved from here to there. This is the concept of the port facility, which has embankments to control the flow of the canal or river. They can adjust that. They can adjust the speed, the current, right? And they can create the ebb or slack tide of estuaries. That's all done. And so if you think of banking in the way that you think of farming and water systems and port facilities, you'll understand banking, because banking is the imagery of water management. Just like water is essential, so too is the token credit, the social credit that we universally accept as a means of exchange, where you have exchange starts out with merchants exchange. A farmer sells to his broker, the food broker then sells to the grocery stores or the food markets, and you have a chain of command of from farm to table. But it doesn't really happen by accident. It happens through a currency system of both water and token credits.
Yes, everything.
Coin are an example of a token system. Go ahead.
Everything that you have described is why the Grim Reaper, which is Saturn, everything that you've talked about is represented by Saturn. Systems, farming, and harvesting. That's all the Saturn symbolism, and that's why he's got a scythe. That's why Saturn has always got a scythe. It's because he is the harvester. And literally everything you said is perfectly symbolized by Saturn. And that's why it pops up in all of the occult systems. That's why they have the black robes. That's why the story of Cain and Abel. That's why Cain was the tiller of the ground, farmer. Yeah, indeed.
The left eye of Horus, when he had his pulled his eye out to give it to his father, I believe. Cain and Abel, or Horus and Set, got into it, a sibling rivalry.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
These concepts of this family rivalry, competition to see who's going to be the new Dr. Evil or the Circle of Trust, countered by, of course, my channel's Star Chamber Investigation, which is the antithesis of the Dr. Evil Circle of Trust. We have the kryptonite to that.
And well, it's a good good analogy about the idea of this family rivalry, because when you get into power dynamics, usually it is based on family lines and blood. And because of that, for instance, as any of us, are constrained to what we can do in one lifetime. And then, once we're gone, we're gone. But, if you have children and you ensure that your children will continue the work after you die, and this has happened for a long time, then you're acting as a principality over history. And principality is still a term used today. There's Principality of Monaco, and what's the other couple other ones?
San Remo.
Yeah.
And Luxembourg is a principality also.
Mm-hmm.
They're tax havens, and they're bank friendly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the whole thing is run that way because of that dynamic, because there is a fascination with blood and blood types, but your blood, your children or your heirs are to be pretty much traumatized and forced to continue the cycle of abuse. And that's, the butterfly, they discovered that trauma past 3 generations would become inherited. And so very much so.
Right. Well, anyway, yeah, this is the situation that we find ourselves in is that we're within a pyramid that have subsidiary doppelganger twins. There's enormous redundancy and clones within this octopus tentacle. So, for example, if you were to be a resistor with a saber sword and you chopped off one of the octopus tentacles, you still have a long way to go. There's at least a dozen tentacles. So can you really chop off all 12? Because they build in from the United Nations. Then they created a kind of a clone think tank called the World Economic Forum in 1971. The United Nations was created in 1945 at the conclusion of World War II. We had the League of Nations and it morphed into the United Nations at the conclusion of World War II. And then in 1971, we had the Klaus Schwab, Dr. Evil Baldhead creation of the World Economic Forum, which is in the same Geneva neighborhood as is the headquarters of NATO. NATO is the military, the one world military. It's located in the House of Peace. I find that a juxtaposition.
It's always like that.
And because they wage war 24/7, but yet they have the audacity to be residing in the House of Peace. But the United Nations and NATO doesn't know anything about peace. They're constantly involved with terrorism and the resettlement of people on this planet. And resettlements come through, a PRS system. The controller introduces a problem. They watch how panicky and frightened the citizenship is, called the reaction. And then the government proposes a solution, like COVID, right? First, you create a world pandemic, which can never happen scientifically, it cannot happen. But it can happen in the pea-sized brains of clueless people. And you create this psychological fear called COVID, or what's called the coronavirus. And then you got Donald Trump introduces Operation Warp Speed to create a novel vaccine, which is not a vaccine, it's a bioweapon trace, track, and targeting system. And then this is supposed to allay your fears and to tranquilize your anxiety, is that just get the jab. And by the way, you need some booster shots too. Oh, and then there's the Omicron variant. And don't forget about monkeypox and bird flu. We got to get vaccinated for those too, to heap graphene into your body so that you put out a strong signature on the Raytheon missile guidance and Lockheed trace, track, and targeting systems so that we can milk you like a dairy cow and put you down and euthanize you when your expiration date has matured. When you have matured, you will be sent off to the cremation ceremony. This is classic pacification and control techniques, rinse and repeated over 1,000 years. This is what they always do. That's what the whole purpose of terrorism is. That's the whole purpose of war. And do you know you cannot have a terrorism event without a banker? You
Right.
have to have a series of bankers because they have this security system, need to know basis. So there would be some bankers that are, pretty high up the authority obelisk. And then you'd have in the field level bankers. So, we had Abigail Folger. She was a low level banker who was just beginning her career when she was retired from duty. But then you have senior people like the president of the World Bank, like Robert McNamara, like Tom Clausen, for example. Those are people who've been around for decades, and then they rise to be the president of the World Bank. Or Christine Lagarde, who is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, which is an agency of the United Nations. She's moved on. She's no longer in charge there. And Klaus Schwab was the managing director and founder of World Economic Forum. He's moved on because apparently there's a sex scandal involved with him.
Always.
And installed Larry Ratfink from UCLA, Los Angeles. Larry Fink, he's the managing director of BlackRock. So BlackRock is now running the World Economic Forum, which is across the street from NATO. What a surprise. And I sent you a picture of the World Economic Complex, which is quite impressive. It looks like the Rand Corporation, if you ask me. but they have a college campus series of buildings that's walking distance away from the the NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's the World Economic Forum. I mean, what are those people doing in there? This is who's running our world. This little cabal. And you need a security clearance to get into Geneva, Switzerland, and you'll need a double security clearance to go into the lobby of that. I don't think they're going to let you anywhere
I'm
near
pretty
that.
sure that you have to fly into wherever, like you can't get there by car. You have to take a private plane to this location. Pretty
No,
sure.
you can drive. You can drive
Can
if
you?
you can get past the checkpoints. Because
Oh,
remember, Switzerland is completely a military guarded hamlet. I mean,
yeah.
only Maria von Trapp and Jennifer Small could walk through Switzerland. But for me, juxtaposition, the only way I got to Switzerland is because I was with a National Guard of Italy, Carabinieri, and I was with a officer of the Carabinieri who's partnered with those gendarme guards because we went past Lago Maggiore and there is a guarded, secured hamlet gate. And we had to have a 5 to 10 minute conversation, which I just sat there and didn't say anything. And I was told, don't talk, just don't talk. And the Italian sweet talked, and we went through without having to pay any fees. And the next thing you know, there I am on this pristine pavement, which you could eat an elegant French meal on the street. It's so clean. I'd never seen streets so clean. There's no litter, there's no potholes. There's the most pristine, perfect road. And you know, on a bicycle, you average 1.5 kilometers an hour quicker. You go faster. You
Wow.
go faster because there's no resistance. Like American roads are really considered,
They're
pedestrian.
bad.
They're like dirt roads.
Yeah.
You have to go to a dirt road in Switzerland to be equal to a road in California or some farming road in Yolo County. In other words, it's kind of embarrassing. But in Switzerland, it's just amazing how cuckoo clocks can pay for those roads. So it turns out that they don't pave the roads with cuckoo clocks. They do it with banking. And Operation Gladio, which is a pyramid within a pyramid, it's an assassination and terrorism group, part of NATO. That's part of NATO. You see, NATO is above it. They call it OTAN and NATO. It's NATO OTAN. They spell it forward and backward. But Operation Gladio is the assassination, torture, kidnapping, and the army left behind in every Hunger Game nation of the world. Operation Gladio has offices and they partner with your local county sheriff in the fusion department, and they can go out and murder people physically. That's if you don't want to do it on a keyboard using a 24-year-old graduate of MIT who could target you because you have a MAC address and a real ID, and they can put you down without having to send the Gladio team in. But this is all being done out of Geneva, Switzerland, which is home to the United Nations. The United Nations is headquartered in Geneva. Now, I realize it's headquartered in Manhattan, New York also, but that's the doppelganger twin, New York City and Geneva. And guess what? Paris and London and Hong Kong and Tehran and Cairo and Tel Aviv and Rome, Italy and Milan, Italy and Rio de Janeiro and Buenos Aires and Santiago, Chile, they all have Gladio offices, they all have NATO offices, and they all have agencies of the United Nations, which if you go down the list of all the different agencies, you'll see that our entire world economics, our entire world anthropology has been planned. We have a planned society and a planned banking and a planned military. And I hope this is going to help, viewers who are wondering how you can, have a coup d'etat, install the Shah of Iran for 26 years, conduct a second coup d'etat, eliminate the Shah of Iran, install a religious leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and you can do it in an orchestrated fashion. And the biggest part of the program is using our friends in the media to present a story of how this is possible. When the reality is it's done in Geneva, Switzerland, in a conference room. They created Israel in a conference room. They created the Shah of Iran in a conference room. And they created the Ayatollah Khomeini in a conference room in Geneva. Back to you, Josh.
Yeah, I think that really puts it into perspective here. I've got this list here. May 14th, 1948, State of Israel, 1953, BP Oil, CIA, and British MI6 coup organized for Mossadegh and Anglo-Persian oil, 1953, the Shah is installed, 63, the White Revolution, top-down aggressive land seizure and reset, totalitarian policies asserted by the Shah. Khomeini emerged as a vocal critic and was exiled in 64. However, his ideological tensions persisted between Pahlavi and Khomeini. It's ironic because the names are pretty much almost the same. Because the guy that they have there sounds, his name is Khomeini, or it's the same name almost, but different. The demonstrations began in 77. Civil resistance included communists, socialists, Islamists. And then 1977, this is a familiar name for the people who have caught the DB Cooper episode that we did. I think that was last week. And we said that we believed it was Robert Rackstraw because he was working with Bell helicopters flying the Shah around.
And Air America.
Yes. And then that brings us to 1979. The Shah flees, probably on a helicopter driven by Rackstraw. 79, February 11th, the Ayatollah is installed. 79, November 4th. The 444-day crisis was 66 hostages. 4/8/12. 66, 12, 33, 33, 33, 33.
Of course.
Well, I think that these numbers are the way that they are sort of sending little codes to each other.
Yeah.
And this is one of our ops. And this was conceived in a conference room, a Dr. Strangelove, big plexiglass meeting. Well, what are we going to do? What nefarious activity will we do today? Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, because
it's in such contrast to these squeaky clean streets that you could eat off versus the horrors that they're actually perpetrating on the world. I mean, it's really, that makes it even creepier.
Yeah, and it's the thing about it is, like, for instance, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, all of these articles you're reading, like, for stuff going on now, there's in a headline, or it's like they go out of their way to mention that, oh, this guy had 13 stitches, or he had 33 stitches. I'm like, okay, it's like, if this was just like random, I don't think they would be going out of their way to say it to the camera, like, making sure people notice. It always pops up. A 33 will pop up, a 13 will pop up, and it's always stated, like they're telling somebody. So it's very interesting.
On the other hand, they won't tell you the cause of deaths. We have all these dead people, and we don't really, it's just like, oh, they died. And they're not specific at all. But then when they tell you, like, how many stitches you have, they're real specific.
Right.
I mean, I don't think that you would normally mention how many stitches a person had ever.
Right.
I mean, like, who cares? Like, is that really relevant? But if they manically died in their bathroom, and then I have to wait 3 months and find out it's rodent droppings, or I have to wait 4 months in the case of Aaron Valente and find out it's a manic episode, then I'm going to call bullshit on your cause of death. Okay?
Right.
And don't tell me you drowned with no water in your lungs. I'm calling bullshit on that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got the charts too. You had sent me a few charts. There's basically an organization structure always embedded within 500 top and bottom organization structures, because go ahead.
That's peacekeeping, which is an agency within NATO, which is under the auspices of the Big Tent. The Big Tent is the big superstructure pyramid.
Yes.
And then you have NATO, and then within NATO you have peacekeeping. And then over there we got world hunger, we got world banking, international monetary fund, we have farming, we have immigration, we have child trafficking. They have an agency for resettlements of people wherever. They're set up anytime to move people.
Here's the whole thing. It's beyond the scope of this one video because there's so much that we could go over, but the whole thing is insanely large. And they are very well organized because the organization in these structures is designed in such a way that it should be generative and able to replicate itself. For instance, you hear about a pyramid scheme. Very important because the pyramid allows for each row down to grow exponentially. And that's where the power lies. And that is going on, like, let's just go all the way back to like the pyramids were created. They had to create a structure of logistics to build the pyramids. And that was actually, as far as I've heard, the organization of persons and societies and civilization building. Really, it got its start with the pyramids and other similar projects around the world because, almost every culture has either pyramids or monoliths of some kind. And so, in doing and building those projects, they organize their societies. And
And
that's
you
what's
have to
about.
build a pyramid near a water source
Yes.
because of the employment of all the workers. You've got to have a water source or you cannot build a magnificent pyramid. Cannot.
Right. Let's see, I was going to here. Let me read this little section that I've got here. It says the pyramid represents slavery perfected as a religion. It is the structure of a hive where the individual soul is crushed to build a monument to the man god at the top. It is the Tower of Babel rebuilding itself brick by brick, soul by soul, waiting for the light bearer to descend and claim his kingdom. That's what it's about because power is a pyramid. That is the power, is that at the top, ideally you could have one person or one eye, but at the bottom, as it goes down, there's so many more layers to it, and by the time you get to the bottom layer, there's hundreds or thousands of bricks, but at the top you just have either a capstone or a chief cornerstone. A cornerstone, it could be any corner of a building, but a chief cornerstone is the tip of a pyramid, the capstone.
And they're all nodes on the network. Now,
Absolutely.
I understand that this doesn't maybe resonate with everyone. This whole pyramid concept.
Mm-hmm.
People relate more to folks that you meet in your town or city. Because it comes down to faces and people and glad handing and the groups of civic organizations that you may belong to, like Rotary, like Kiwanis, like I was in the 2030 Club in my town. So the 2030 Club is like a young man's Rotary, and people go on to Rotary typically after being in the 2030 Club. The Boy Scouts of America, the Girl Scouts of America, the Cub Scouts, all of those things, all of those are pyramidal lower levels to bring people in. Walter Cronkite was in the Del Molle Society, which is named after Jacques de Molay, who was at the stake
on Friday the 13th.
On the River Seine. He was burned on the River Seine on the island where Our Lady of Notre Dame is, in looking at the Notre Dame de Paris, Our Lady of Paris. Jacques Molay was burned staring at Notre Dame Cathedral.
Friday the 13th.
Which has twin towers, right? Mm-hmm. Twin obelisks, essentially, or campaniles with bells. And that recently it burned and they rebuilt it with the Masonic black and white checkerboard marble floor. And they upgraded the bell towers and they installed LED cathedral chandeliers throughout there. The Our Lady of Paris, Notre Dame de Paris, is a direct energy weapon facility for tourists, for clueless tourists who would like to be French fried in the exact way that Jacques de Molay was French fried 2 blocks to the south of the cathedral was Jacques de Molay, who created societies all throughout the world, which graduated Tucker Carlson and Walter Cronkite. And there's a whole laundry list of people who were members of the Del Molay Society who are in media, who are in banking, who are further up the obelisk in the chain of command. And so what I wanted to do is, this is kind of esoteric, the concept of the pillars of our society and the foundational narratives and the foundational mendacities that build the matrix of mendacity. But then if you can put a face to the people who work at the World Economic Forum and work and are heads of agencies at the United Nations or bankers like BlackRock and Blackstone, and you shame them, you publicly shame them, then people can understand that they are part of the fabric of this pyramid of power, which is about techno enslavement and human husbandry to turn humans into walking hard drives and treat them like dairy cows on a plantation. Back to you, Josh.
The whole an easy way to understand the pyramid, very simple, right here is, for instance, you have worked in corporate sector, so like you have a department, and like let's say that you are the head of this department, and so you have a team under you that is designed to get the task done. Like the department is set up to do accounting and finance, and then they invest that into you. And so you have people who are reporting to you, who you can delegate tasks to, but ultimately your department, which you are responsible for, is for finance. And now they will go to you and say, hey, what's up with finance? That's the pyramid. You have people under you who then report to you, and that's your responsibility. It's just it's the corporate system. That is
example, when I worked at a hospital, I started out as assistant controller, then was very quickly made controller, and I had a team of 6 people who worked for me to produce the financial statements each month, to coordinate the audits. We typically had a half a dozen audits every year, and I had to deal with these strangers coming in, putting them in a conference room, getting them their records, pulling their invoices, whatever they need to look at, and then reconcile the bank statement to make sure there's no mistakes, because banks make mistakes, or we make mistakes, people make mistakes. So the only way you're going to detect a mistake is to double and triple check. When you go to the bank and the bank confirms what you brought to the bank, then make sure that's correct. All right. Because you don't want to be overdrawn. So that was my realm, was within the financial reporting and deposits, a little bit of a treasury function because we didn't have a treasury department. So that fell on me with the bank relationships, but the rest of it was basically financial reporting, general ledger. But then I was promoted eventually to chief financial officer. Now that expanded my team from what I already had, which I retained, but then I had to add data processing, information systems, which is the computer people. And I had no idea how the computer system works, but they had to report to me, and I'm clueless. And then billing, the billing of Medicare, the billing of Medicaid, the billing of workers' compensation and employer health insurance. There are dozens of people who can pay a hospital bill, and that all came under me too. So I had to talk to the billing supervisor. And then because of my status, I was put onto the infectious committee for disease, and for infectious problems within the acute care hospital. I was like, hey, I don't really have time for this. I mean, because I got a full-time job, and I have 4 full-time jobs now, and I don't even understand the computer works. And then they want me to talk about, ammonia on the linoleum, and I got some knucklehead who wants to put carpeting in the hospital. Like, carpeting? Are you out of your mind? I mean, that's got mildew. I know that. Just leave it linoleum and look, because I know Bob Chappell from my breakfast meeting. He said just mop it up. Every day they do the mopping and it's clean as a whistle. But you put carpet down there, Bob Chappell's going to have a coronary heart attack. I mean, it's just going to be impossible. But he knew a board member who owned a carpet company, and God, he didn't carpet the lobby. He carpeted the lobby, and we stopped him from going into patient care.
That's
but I
horrible.
mean, full court press. And meanwhile, I have all these financial issues. I don't have time to argue about carpeting, the acute care hospital. I mean, let the nursing director do that. But no, you know how to pay for the carpets. And I go, I don't want to pay for the carpets. I don't want any carpets.
See,
then I said it was being negative. I'm being negative. And
see,
that's just control, pal.
you
see that eventually I felt I was over my head because they're overwhelming me, because I don't think I should be in charge of the financial statements and carpets and Odyssey.
Right.
I mean, either way, I think they're incompatible. There's too much.
It's crazy. Well, what we're getting into here, like the conclusion to this is, why do they call them corporations? It's because this is just a body, but it's higher dimensional. This is a entity, and that's why a corporation is a legal person. That's what a principality is.
I mean, that hospital's still there. I'm gone.
It's gross.
And there's someone doing my job, right?
I don't know why you put that in there.
People are totally disposable and interchangeable.
Yeah.
But the corporation is mostly it's the same.
There was a book, and the guy tried to, I think what he did is he tried to build by himself, like from scratch, a toaster. He tried to build it. And basically the whole, like he actually went to mine the ore and everything he needed. Like he built it by hand, and it was like failed horribly. The point being is that it was a really compelling case that once you assemble this corporation or this body of people with departments being akin to organs, you have a heart and it does a job. And so you have a department and it also does a job. And your organs are made up of cells, and the department is made up of human resources, cells, batteries. So we're dealing with electricity. But once you bring this corporation together, it can build this toaster, and it builds great toasters. But like one person by themselves is like very hard, almost impossible to do by yourself. So there's a mystical element to this no matter what. And some people see it, that's one thing. But then some people don't see it, and that's one thing. But then the people who do see it can game it. The bull on Wall Street has a ring in its nose, because if you can measure something, you can game it, you can manipulate it. And so if you can put the ring in, you can lead it around by the nose.
Right. Let's put a face on this conversation, which is going to bring Jennifer in and Wall Street in and finance and banking into this pyramidal. It's like a military chain of command. That's what the obelisk is for everyone. Go find your obelisk. You have one somewhere if you're a major city, you're going to have more than one obelisk. But anyway, so could you do the pictures of some of the people that I sent you? Josh, could you pull up some examples?
Well, I also want to just comment quickly, Jux, your experience at the hospital where they wanted you to eventually take care of carpeting. That's a great example of the problem of too much centralization. You're given too much power in a way, and then you're given stuff that you didn't know about, and it was undermining. No, it was undermining your efficiency and what you wanted to do anyway. So,
absolutely, because then it's like I might have a nervous breakdown, or
I would too.
Like it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a hostage guard in Tehran. I think this is across the street from our CIA State Department embassy. They kept, I think, the hostages across the street at a hotel, if I got that right. I'm sure they moved them around, and I wouldn't be surprised if the hostages, all of whom are collecting their normal paychecks whilst they're hostages, I would assume that they're going on an underground tunnel back to the State Department, to their cubicle, to continue their job, and then they're available for photo ops. I don't think they're really.
I don't know well, the hostage I talked to, Richard Queen, the one who got early release, he had some real horror stories to tell.
Uh-huh. Well,
being, you know,
yeah, that's probably why they released him early, so you can get those stories out there in the media, right?
you're so
They could be
cynical.
like made up
You're
stories,
so
right?
cynical. Maybe it really happened. Maybe they're all
Yeah,
lined up.
maybe, or maybe not. Maybe he's just
Yeah,
lying.
you're right. You're
Okay,
right.
so I have look all those people
Maybe.
paid. They're not losing a paycheck. They're
It,
hostage for 444 days. Masonic 12. Okay. Oh, this is scary. Put a whole mask. This is an early COVID picture. Before masking, there was masking. And so we have this masking that continues to inject itself into our historical international stories. But this is in 1980. This is like 1980 photograph of a masked hostage.
Mhm.
Looks pretty scary. Okay, and people can relate to being this. Now this is one of the hostages who's grown a beard, and he's talking to our president-elect Ronald Reagan, who hadn't worked one day as the president and the leader of the free world. Here he is being congratulated by a hostage who looks like he's giving him a gift for getting him out of Tehran, Iran. And Ronald Reagan is saying, well, just consider it my, Academy Award. I didn't even have a full 8 hours that day, but I did free the hostages.
that was pretty suspicious to me that this was just resolved like the second that he was in.
You always call in a Hollywood actor if things get serious. Okay,
Right.
the burning of the fake American flag. That's a Swiss 13-striped Masonic allegiance.
When Alice is in Minnesota.
Got the wrist up like a Heil Hitler salute from
So Minnesota.
revolutionaries who's burning a Swiss colonial flag. Hey, you know what? If I was there, I'd do a Heil Hitler salute too. I'm proud of that. Burn all the flags, I say, and get rid of all the black robes. Let's move on to the next one. Let's just keep showing. There he is. He's the star of the show, and Jennifer helped, promote him. Not maybe as much as Time Magazine did, but she worked for UPI, and she covered the Ayatollah Khomeini. There he is. Supreme leader of Iran. Let's go to the next one. There he is. Isn't he handsome?
That's someone else. I don't know who that is. That's
Well,
not.
they're both. One
Probably
is
the new.
one is Khomeini and the other guy is Khomeini. So
This
they're
is
both the same, basically.
This is a modern day iteration.
He's the guy that's in there now.
So what's the next one we got here? There he is, waving.
He's
to
got
the
one arm. He's got one arm.
He looks like Pope Leo. Next,
Yeah.
he's like the Pope. Oh, there's the shot. That's
Here.
like that's like Idi Amin, right? Dada, Idi Amin Dada. Doesn't Idi Amin Dada's uniform look exactly like the Shah's? Remember,
Right
he
here.
goes, see this medal here? This is for kicking. I kick all the white people out of Uganda. I kick them all out. See, this one is for lying. Richard Nixon, he has a really big one.
His son looks just like him. This is the guy that they're cheering on right now.
Doppelganger twin.
Well, Israel. Yeah. I believe Israel wants this guy in. They want regime change in Iran, and they want the son, the son or grandson or whatever of the Shah.
They are openly admitting now. Like I think the guy who Pompeo tweeted out, he said, "Oh, Mossad is out there marching with these people." Mossad is they're just openly admitting it.
Thing as Mossad, and there's no such thing as Israel, and there's no such thing as the Shah of Iran. Keep moving, because I'm going to show you where they're going to decide who get. Whoa, back, go back one. There's our guy. There's DB Cooper. Yeah. DB Cooper is a resident of the Shah of Iran, probably living in his palace. For the CIA, Bell Helicopters, the CIA, Air America, and he works for the Shah of Iran in Tehran just before the Shah got kicked out. There's DB Cooper. All right, there's another DB Cooper. There's Henry Kissinger speaking from. He couldn't make the meeting. Couldn't make it to Davos. This is the World Economic Forum. It's either in Geneva or Davos or wherever they meet. And there's Henry Kissinger telepathically appearing, since he's such a learned man from Harvard University. There's Henry Kissinger. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is your friendly Gladio team that works with your sheriff's department. We call them Department of Homeland Security. And if your name is P. Diddy or Cynthia Beck, They can come in anytime and look in your tunnel system in your basement. Next. Yeah. Next. Okay, this is General Turgeson. He's in the war room, and he is talking with the President of the United States about a mine shaft gap. Mr. President, we must avoid a mine shaft gap. And I am telling you, between two unfortunate choices, regrettable but necessary, where we have a distinction and a difference between a post-nuclear world where everybody's dead, or a world of reset where only 40 to 50 million people tops get killed. That's the decision we have to make. And that window is rapidly closing, Mr. President. This is like the World Economic Forum talking with Klaus Schwab and Larry Ratfink about how many people should be euthanized with vaccinations and neuromodulation, CRISPR DNA injury, courtesy of CRISPR Therapeutics, Switzerland, and neuromodulation known as molecular engineering of humans. Any comments? General Turgeson. All right. This is through the United Nations, WHO, World Economic Organization. They have their NATO troops are called medical doctors. And they wear masks too, just like the Iranian hostages did. And
so a lot of people don't think that she's real, and she kind of looks a little weird.
This is Christine Lagarde. She's French, and she was in charge of the International Monetary Fund and in Geneva. So there she is, and she's moved on. She's still getting paid, and she's still worse. She's on a board of directors. This see if you can know. This is one of the fellows of the really it's a pseudo think tank, the World Economic Forum, with their Rand Corporation style office complex. Everybody knows who this is, right? This is symbolized where I worked at Bank of America. We had the black stone at the base on the carnelian granite at the bottom at the plaza where I worked for Bank of America, building 555 California Street, San Francisco, the Black Stone. This is the managing director of Blackstone, and his office at 345 Park Avenue, Manhattan, New York. This is Stephen Schwartzman. He works with Larry Ratfink. Larry Ratfink's in charge of, BlackRock. But you have to understand that BlackRock and Blackstone are separate clones of the Swiss Bank Authority. And this is Klaus Schwab, the founder and longtime director of the World Economic Forum. Looks a lot like...
Here's the Blackstone, the banker's heart.
Yeah. They didn't have the lawn. That wasn't there when I was there. You could walk right up. That's to keep you from touching it. I've touched that thing over 200 times in my life, and I'm not dead yet. Okay, I got my fingerprints all over that thing. My DNA is all over that thing. Okay, so the thing is that now I don't know if I want to get my shoes dirty in that. Anyway, he looks like Mike Myers, Dr. Evil.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's Dr. Evil. That's Mike Myers, right? You know? And then remember, he's number one. Number two is the evil Robert Natalie Wood's husband, Robert Wagner. He wore a patch over his left eye. Mm-hmm. Did you remember that? He's the one that was involved with the murder of his wife in Santa Catalina Island 33 days before the end of 1981. He threw his wife into at 11:15 p.m. He threw his wife into the water with Christopher Walken there, present, and Dennis Durnan, who is the captain of the Splendor. And she was murdered by a guy who went on to work with Mike Myers as number two, who wore a patch over his left eye, creating the right eye of Horus. And this is, the left eye of Horus remains. The right eye was shot out like Jack Kennedy. And this is Robert Wagner. And he works with Mike Myers, who looks like Klaus Schwab. Who are these people? Oh,
well, look, see their eyes. They got something wrong with the eye. All of them.
Yeah, they're all disturbing people who are associated with the United Nations agencies.
Well, this one guy, I can't remember who he was, but this guy right here was involved with the World Economic Forum. I can't remember his name, but you just reminded me of it.
All right, well,
But
keep going,
okay,
keep going. Is that any more? That's World Economic Forum.
that's the headquarters. I think that
Yeah.
is it.
Okay.
Then there's these.
Well, okay, that's good. That's enough. The point
Okay.
is, those are some of the faces. Some of them are ugly. Some of them are not bad. But the thing is that that's who are the puppets of the agencies. All those people, Larry Ratfink, Klaus Schwab, Steven Schwartzman, Christine Lagarde, 100% disposable. They can all be thrown away in the way that Jennifer explains, like a tissue, like a used tissue. They're all expendable, even though they live in large homes with housekeeping and butlers, and they have limo services. They live in gilded cages. They are 24/7 surveilled
By
They
those people you
literally
just mentioned.
within their corporate structure, and they are, following their directives and issuing mandates to the people below them within their departments and divisions, their platoons and their units, like Charlie Company that went into the My Lai hamlets and killed 504 innocent unarmed civilians, mostly women. That's what I'm saying is they don't get their fingernails dirty going in and bayoneting pigs and chickens and women and pregnant women. They don't do that. But they issue a directive to a person who goes in field and commits felony homicide. Do you understand?
Here we go. I'll get everybody up to speed here. First, we have protocols or white papers, mandates disguised or documented as official procedure. Juxtaposition defines it as an illicit conspiracy formulated in secret by figures adhering to Swiss bank directives aimed at legitimizing illegal actions without public transparency or debate. Mandates, ultimatums, or unfriendly commands issued by higher authorities deceptively justified under the guise of established protocol. Ultimatums, aggressive, unfriendly commands issued by pompous higher authority, often with threatening consequences, or else if obedience is not immediately rendered. And there's your higher authority right there. A term for those holding superior compulsory authority, wielding the power to issue orders and enforce obedience through the terrifying concept of or else. The ultimate seat of higher authority is the Swiss bank apparatus located in Geneva, Switzerland. We go.
Yes. Yes.
Very important for everybody. I think even though I've read a handful of those a few times, I'll continue to do it because the grammar that we use is the most important part. Like you have to, for instance, remember we mentioned earlier in this show how like all of these places are there for peace and they're for helping in charity, and they are what's the word? They give money away, and that's their job. They are philanthropists, but it's actually completely opposite. Like they say that they're helping people. What they're actually doing is using it as a cover so that they can do whatever else they want to do. And so we, instead of using the terms that they give us that are deceptive, we have to use the words and terms that actually describe these things. And
when you mischaracterize the sources and uses of money or the currency of the flow of the directives, a directive is an order. It's a command. But you see, directive sounds less brutal. It's more subtle. But directive means a direct order, a command. The captain is giving you a command, and we follow orders, or else you end up in the brig. You get hung from the yardarms, thrown overboard, and let Jaws or Moby Dick swallow you whole. Right? That's what happens if you are disobedient in a maritime situation. And maritime law is one of the agencies of the United Nations. Maritime law. They're in charge of all courtrooms throughout the world, where the judges, magistrates wear black robes. And that's headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, with NATO and the World Economic Forum and World Health Organization. So what I'm trying to tell you is that a directive is a polite way of saying, I'm giving you an ultimatum and you're going to do it, right?
Mhm.
And here's another example. It's my best one yet. Marlon Brando in the film The Godfather, he played Don Corleone, named after a village in Sicily, Corleone. And he changed his name because he had to get out of town because they murdered his mother and father. So he named himself Vito Corleone, and then he became a Don when he became a father and had sons and advanced within his franchise in New York. He advanced to get status of a geographical area where he could involved with whiskey sales, prohibition, secrecy during the 20s and early 30s. This is one of the franchise ways you make money is running rum, okay, from Canada into New York illegally. But then you can be a Don, and you can do prostitution, and you can do drug trafficking, and so on and so forth. And protection, where you sell insurance without a license, it's called protection racket. To prevent people from throwing a brick through your window, you pay me $100 a week, and I'll make damn sure nobody throws a brick through your window. But if you don't give me the $100, I'll throw the brick through the window.
Right.
Okay? That's how I guarantee your subjugation, because your business is in my franchise. That's the Godfather. And the Godfather didn't go bossing people around, like Klaus Schwab does, or like Bill Gates says, we all got to get vaccinated, right? See, the Godfather would never be that discourteous. What he says instead is he sends one of his minions out and says, the Godfather would like to ask a favor of you. I'd like to ask a favor. God help you if you decline the favor, right?
Well,
favor makes it sound like it's voluntary, but if you refuse a favor, what is the Godfather's policy? Once refused a favor, the Godfather will never ask a second favor, ever. Which means you are now cast adrift, and you don't have any protection within his franchise. You are not aligned with the captain of your ship. You are a disrespectful. You've shown disrespect. Disrespect means non-compliant. These are the synonyms that the military uses. Non-compliant people are resistors. Today, Donald Trump would call them domestic terrorists.
I'm pretty sure they have, yeah.
We have ICE, and this is why we have the Department of Homeland Security, and we have these intelligence operations like the Fusion Center, and we are collecting your emails and your text messages, is because we're trying to do proactive policing, which means the thought police. That if you say anything negative about Jewish people or Israel, we will send, a NATO soldier to your home to intimidate you, because we use intimidation, not free choice. Intimidation. Yeah. That's how the Godfather works. But he doesn't do it overtly. He does it politely by asking you for a favor. And this is what they're doing with the Real ID. They're asking you to go get your Real ID because it's for your protection. Yeah. So people won't hack into your bank account and we know who you are. But they're inviting you into a process where you're going to be harvested like a dairy cow, then spit out to the cremation oven. Don't you get when they're polite like the Godfather is, you are on borrowed time.
The whole thing, that is the consent. Like you have the hypnosis or all of the whole thing requires consent. And they think that because they have tricked you into consenting that they will be absolved. But the idea is that they pretty much manipulated you into consenting. You don't even know what you're consenting to. People don't know what they're consenting to, but they are consenting to it because, like, for instance, they're buying the devices. That is kind of a tacit consent. That is, there's a quote.
And who reads all those really long agreements when you're about to fire up your laptop?
If Melvin Belli were on the show tonight, which I wish he were, Melvin Belli would tell us that those contracts are tort violations, that they're illegal contracts, unenforceable. under constitutional law, but we don't operate under constitutional law. And because Melvin Belli would say that if it's invisible ink or you need a magnifying glass to read it, and it's poorly written, it's too nonsensical, it's very poor grammar, he would say that it's you cannot understand, an intelligent person cannot understand it, they can't see it, they can't read it, they can't comprehend it, they cannot consent to it. And you cannot have an enforceable contract unless you have agreement. And you cannot agree to something if it's invisible. If the terms and conditions cannot be read or understood and comprehended, you have an unenforceable. Now you have a transaction. Maybe you gave money and you got your cell phone to work. But Melvin Belli would tell you that if you don't want to pay anymore, don't. Stop paying. Go pound sand, because you don't have a real legitimate contract. You have a relationship with a person that you really cannot trust. And
I'm really glad to hear that, because I don't want to read that teensy tiny little script that goes on like so. So I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, Melvin Belli was the king of torts. Remember, nobody even knows what a tort is. If you go in and ask a judge, they don't know what the Constitution is, and they don't know what torts are. And they wear a black robe, and they enforce their maritime protocol in a kangaroo court that they call a Supreme Court. And I mean, what Melvin Belli, stood for, was beautiful. But of course, what he did was ugly, because he was involved with COINTEL operations, including phony fake call-ins with the Zodiac killer. And Melvin Belli offered to defend the Zodiac killer for free, pro bono, on live television. Back to you, Josh.
Well, I mean, you brought it up, and I've never heard it before. So apparently, it means wrong, or like a wrong. You've been wronged.
Right.
Gotta look up words.
Civil wrong. It's an assault against your society. It's a public wrong.
Yes, right here. Here it is.
I can't read it. It's too invisible.
Here, I'm going to make it big.
That's a tort, but I'm not agreeing to it, so it doesn't matter. Go ahead. If you can expand it so we can... Oh, there you go.
A tort is a legal wrong committed upon the person or property independent of contract. It may be either 1, a direct invasion of some legal right of the individual; 2, the infraction of some public duty by which special damage accrues to the individual; and 3, the violation of some private obligation by which like damage accrues to the individual. In the former case, no special damage is necessary to entitle the party to recover. Pretty much all of those is like what's happening now.
Well, it's been happening for the last 100 years. Monsanto signing genetically modified seed contracts with farmers all over the world. That's a tort violation. Okay. And then giving a 10% discount for your Roundup pesticide, the contract that you agree to contingent upon you buying the genetically modified corn seed, those are tort violations. Your cellular mobile phone contract is a tort violation. Your cable contract for your Infinity television is a tort violation. Not a single person who is paying money to Comcast and to Monsanto and to all the subsidiary entities who are in the farming and pesticides and herbicide industries, not a single one of those people is operating legally in a constitutional framework. But they don't have to, because they're working under Swiss maritime law run out of Geneva, Switzerland, where whatever you can do, you can legally lie to people, and you won't have a single black robe judge who will defend you. The black robe judge will defend the corporation who committed the tort violation, because the judge will claim, I don't even know what a tort is.
Right.
There you go.
Well, I think this was a very enlightening episode, because a lot of, first of all, to have the firsthand experience from you, Jennifer, that was great. We really appreciated having you on. I'm glad that juxtaposition, you brought it up and you said it would be an interesting idea, and I'm glad that we were able to make it happen today. And it just reminds you how small the world really is. So that was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to share my story. I really appreciate it. I feel
Anytime.
honored to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome to any time. If there's other things you want to share, we can always do it again. But yeah, these systems are ever present, and usually it is, as we've touched on at the beginning. What they'll do is they will find out what works, and they will do that on a smaller scale. And then once they figure out that it works and that it's good to go, they will take that global. They will do the whole thing on a global scale. And pretty much, everything that happened in Gaza, they were testing out all of the digital warfare and like the stuff like that. And now they have enough data to train the models, beta test it. And that's what they did in Vietnam too. So
Exactly. Yep. They do a lot of these things in these third world countries. They test out a lot of stuff, and then they bring it. It's like off Broadway, and then they bring it back for the big show.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that was great. Thanks, Josh. This is a great show. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Brilliant story. Great story.
All righty.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, we appreciated you tuning in for our 9th episode. The next episode will be episode 10. That'll be a pretty big milestone for us. And so we'll think up something interesting for you next week. But until then, guys, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again in the next one. So long.